Ladies and gentlemen, the Deputy Secretary of Defense.
Well, Secretary McHugh, General Allyn, Ms. Allyn, Sergeant Major Chandler, guests. On behalf of Secretary Chuck Hagel, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here today for this very, very important occasion where we bestow the nation's highest honor on First Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing, Army of the Potomac, over 150 years ago when he served. I'd like to especially welcome the descendants of Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing. They've gathered from across America to join us here today. Like many of our nation's distinguished military families, patriotism and selfless sacrifice run deep in the veins of the Cushing family tree. Alonzo's older brother, U.S. Navy Commander William Cushing, sunk the Confederate ironclad ram, the CSS Albemarle, and his younger brother, Lieutenant Howard Cushing, served in the 3rd Cavalry. Another brother, Milton Cushing, served as a Navy paymaster. Now with us here today are over 60 Cushing family members who continue this proud tradition and legacy of service to our nation's armed forces. I'd like to recognize a couple of them before I go on. Ms. Helen Ensign and Brooks Ensign, who are the primary next of kin of Alonzo, would like to welcome you here this afternoon on behalf of all of us here in the Pentagon and all the men and women who serve in our armed forces. Ms. Jessica Loring is going to make some remarks after this we present or have the award ceremony. And retired Lieutenant Colonel Samuel John Cushing and his son, Cadet Matthew John Cushing, who has followed his ancestors' footsteps to West Point, are here with us today also. I'd like to thank all of them for being here. I'd also like to recognize Margaret Zerwick. Now, she is a granddaughter of another Union soldier and a historian, and she is the one who engaged in a battle of over 27 years to have Lieutenant Cushing awarded and recognized for his valor. So I would like to, for us all, to recognize Ms. Zerwick, who is 94 years young, and it's never too late to honor those who have sacrificed so much for our country. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now, an astonishing 1,522 Medals of Honors were awarded to those who fought in the Civil War. But the heroic deeds of Lieutenant Cushing on that bloody day at Gettysburg were overlooked, probably because he did not live to share his own account. It was a different time back in the Civil War. In those times, most of the awardees of the honor lived, and they were there to advocate for their award. Just 2% of all these 1,500 brave American soldiers who were awarded the Medal of Honor died. The rest all lived. So it's probably not it's understanding that Lieutenant Cushing's heroic deeds were kind of forgotten. But because of the efforts of Ms. Zerwick and also the family, we finally have been able to address that mistake and honor him for the role that he played at such a decisive moment in that decisive battle in the Civil War. So 151 years later, which is the longest gap ever between the awarding of a Medal of Honor and the act of valor for which the medal was given, before the Congress, the President, and the Department of Defense are appropriately recognizing Lieutenant Cushing's extraordinary and astonishing courage. Now, I'm particularly thrilled to be here with you this afternoon because, like young Lieutenant Cushing, I am an artilleryman also. I was a Marine artilleryman for 27 years. Now, old Joel Stalin, not exactly my favorite person, but he did call artillery the god of war. But I prefer, a quote attributed to another great captain, Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte, who said that God fights on the side with the best artillery. So artillerymen are a unique bunch. They adore their cannon, which they treat with loving care. So when the time comes, and at that decisive moment in battle, their guns are able to operate and able to fire in support in the Civil War of the infantry and the cavalry, and today in our support of our armor and our special operations also. A Civil War correspondent wrote that while Americans might be an unmilitary people, I might take issue with that, but the mechanical aspects of artillery appeal to a nation of tinkerers, and the American soldier seems to take naturally to artillery. Now that was certainly true of Alonzo Cushing. He was only 22 years old. For those of you who've seen his picture, he looks incredibly young. He was incredibly young. But he was already, at that tender young age, a veteran of some of the greatest and most bloodiest battles of the Civil War. They included Malvern Hill, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. And on the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg, Cushing and his battery, his artillery battery, were positioned on a critical ridge, the anchor of the entire Union position, Cemetery Ridge. For 2 days, as you all know, General Lee's army battered itself against this line of brave Union soldiers, searching for a weakness. But the Northerners held firm, rushing reinforcements from one part of the threatened battlefield to the other. But on the morning of July 3rd, 1863, General Lee and his commanders took a look across that field and said it was time to try to force the issue. So he decided he would roll the dice, throw all of his fresh troops under General Pickett, and have them charge straight at the line on Cemetery Ridge. Some 12,000 men. It's almost hard to imagine this, but those who've seen the reenactments just realize what an incredible sight it must have been. 12,000 men in gray began to converge on the Union defenses right where Lieutenant Cushing and his battery stood waiting. Now, Lee had his own artillery. It was called the Grand Cannon Battery, and he blasted away at the Union lines to try to soften up their defenses. Lieutenant Cushing found himself with only 2 workable cannon left at the end of this barrage. Most of the artillerymen who served the guns were either dead or wounded. But Cushing, without even thinking about it, rolled his 2 remaining cannon right up to the stone wall that created the bloody angle, and those of you who have been to Gettysburg know exactly what I'm talking about. And he stood there and fired into the oncoming mass of infantry as they charged across the field. First it was solid shell, then it was canister, then, grape, and then it was canister, a big shotgun shell as you were. But the Southern troops were brave that day, as brave as the Union troops. And they came on until they had reached the very muzzle of Lieutenant Cushing's guns. Now, Lieutenant Cushing had already been shot twice. He was grievously wounded. And his comrades said, "Lieutenant, it's time for you to leave. We can take over from here." But like any truly dedicated artilleryman or any dedicated soldier, he refused to leave his guns. "No," he said, "I stay right here and fight it out or die in the attempt." Minutes later, the Confederate wave crashed over the position, and Lieutenant Cushing was cut down. And he joined, and I quote, "the radiant fellowship of the fallen," as Gettysburg veteran Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who himself won the Medal of Honor, so eloquently put it. And although he didn't know it, or his comrades didn't know it at the time, his valor was worthy of being awarded the highest medal that our nation bestows on its men and women, even if it took a little time to do it. Now, as President Obama noted yesterday, Cushing's memory will be further honored later this month when the USS Gettysburg, a cruiser in the United States Navy, one of our most powerful ships, they will dedicate the officers' dining room, or the wardroom as they call it, as the Cushing Wardroom. So it has taken America more than 150 years to officially honor Lieutenant Cushing's extraordinary valor. But it's never too late to correct the record and appropriately honor our fallen. So I am extremely proud here to be with all of you today to help induct Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing into our Hall of Heroes, where he joins many, many other brave men who have won this honor. And we want to thank all of our nation's heroes for their service and sacrifice, and particularly those like Lieutenant Cushing, who gave their last full measure so that we all might live under freedom and have a better life. So let us all heed the words of Civil War veteran Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, quote, "Our dead brothers still live for us and bid us think of life, not death, of life to which in their youth they lent their passion and joy of spring." Thank you again for being here this afternoon, and I look forward to the remainder of the ceremony.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of the Army.
Thank you. Good afternoon. 151 years ago this month, at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, President Abraham Lincoln delivered what I know we all recognize as one of the most iconic, one of the most enduring speeches in American history. It came just 4½ months after the Union armies defeated those of the Confederacy at the Battle of Gettysburg. And in that now storied Gettysburg Address, Lincoln eloquently memorialized those who willingly gave their lives so that future generations, our generation, might live in freedom. And in so doing, he reiterated the very principles of our American democracy. But Lincoln did something more than that in his 2-minute, 272-word address. An address, by the way, that was significantly shorter, and as history has shown, far more memorable than the 2-hour oration of the day's featured speaker, Edward Everett. And I want to promise you I'm going to be more Abe-like than Everett-like with my remarks, and I know that's a great relief to all. But in his words, the president charged the audience. He charged the nation, really, to honor the memory of the fallen by recommitting themselves to the virtues for which they fought and died. Lincoln urged, and I quote here, "For us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion." And I, too, am honored to be with all of you here today to recall the cause of Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing's last full measure of devotion to his country. And I am proud, too, that as a nation, we're honoring his faithful actions that day in July in 1863, and that we're taking increased devotion to that cause for which he and so many others died. And it's truly right and proper, at long last, that we do so. So, Mr. Secretary, Vice, Ms. Allyn, Sergeant Major, to all of the Cushing family who have come so far and who have waited so long, we are deeply honored to have you here, and especially thrilled that you could join us in this moment. To the tenacious Margaret Zerwick, as the Undersecretary noted, or Deputy Secretary noted, the historian and advocate who first petitioned congressmen and senators and presidents on Alonzo's behalf, our thanks, our congratulations for tirelessly shining a light on this incredible soldier's deeds. And let me also welcome some other distinguished guests. Mr. Ed Clark, the Superintendent of Gettysburg National Military Park, Lieutenant General Robert Caslin, the Superintendent of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Each and every one of you are welcomed, and we're honored that you are here. Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing, a United States Military Academy graduate, lies in the West Point Cemetery, Section 26, Row A, Grave 7. At the behest of his mother, his headstone reads, "Faithful unto death." Faithful unto death. And it's that faithfulness, if I may, I'd like to talk just a bit about on this very special day for the Cushing family, special day for our Army, and indeed for the American people. For it is faithfulness which permeates the Cushing legacy, the faithfulness of a young but incredibly dedicated soldier to do his duty, the faithfulness of a Wisconsin family to share and to sacrifice their most precious gift in service to the nation, the faithfulness of fellow soldiers like Sergeant Frederick Fugger, also a Medal of Honor recipient who fought alongside his lieutenant to the very end, and the faithfulness of ordinary so-called citizens of ordinary background like Margaret Zerwick, to never forget a soldier's selfless sacrifice to champion his noble cause. And finally, the faithfulness of a nation to honor and never forget its most patriotic servants. Faithfulness is defined rather simply as the concept of unfailingly remaining loyal to someone or something and putting that loyalty into consistent practice, regardless of extenuating circumstances. It was then, on that day in 1863, as it remains today, a defining virtue of our great United States Army. And if you've read or heard of this 22-year-old Wisconsinite's short but storied life, or reflected on the Medal of Honor citation, then you know that the cause of our nation was something to which Lon, as his friends called him, had no trouble being faithful toward. Born on January 19th in 1841 to his father, Milton Buckingham Cushing, and mother, Mary B. Cushing, Alonzo spent the first years of his life in Delafield, Wisconsin. Upon the death of his father in 1847, Mary moved the family to Fredonia, New York, where Alonzo and his 3 surviving brothers would grow into young adulthood. Alonzo was later appointed to the military academy at West Point in 1857, graduating 4 years later, 12th in a class of 34 cadets. Upon graduation, as the deputy noted, he saw action at First Manassas and was cited for gallant and meritorious services at the battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, receiving brevet promotions following each. He was, by every account, exceptionally skilled as an artillery officer and was well loved and respected by his subordinates and superiors alike. Generals described him as, quote, brave, cool, and confident. One of his men described him as a most able soldier, a man of excellent judgment and character. In all, each noted what they described as his poise under fire, radiant grin, and infectious smile, which, as they described it, gave a soothing effect during the chaos of battle. All of those qualities and more were present on July 3rd in 1863 at approximately 2:30 p.m. at the height, as you've heard, of Pickett's charge at the Battle of Gettysburg. As artillery commander in Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery, Army of the Potomac, Cushing was described as, quote, boldly standing tall atop Cemetery Ridge at a place, as the deputy noted, which was known as the Angle. At the start of the battle, he commanded 126 men, 6 cannons. Before long, the nightmarish barrage of Confederate artillery took its toll. Every one of his officers had been killed, and as the deputy said, only 2 of his guns remained. Wounded in the abdomen, as well as the right shoulder, Cushing refused to leave the battlefield despite appeals repeatedly that he do so. When rebel forces closed to within 100 yards of his position, Cushing was shot, and he lied dead. Blackened by powder and soaked red by blood, Cushing epitomized the essential faithfulness of the entire armies, each side, that day. Like today's soldiers, Cushing's army did not fight for empire. They didn't fight for domination or personal gain. They fought for a value. They fought for a cause. And indeed, they fought for one another. They fought for things that they found worthy of their last full measure of devotion. At Gettysburg, the very fate of our nation hung in the balance. And thanks to people, to soldiers, to heroes like Alonzo Cushing and the faithful who followed him, our great American experiment was saved and the United Nation preserved. One admirer Cushing's bravery wrote, quote, "On the field of Gettysburg more than once I stood where the brave Cushing gave up his life, right at the peak of Pickett's daring charge. History will not let that smiling, splendid boy die in vain. Her dew will glisten forever over his record as earthly morning dew glistens on the fields. Fame loves the gentleman and the true-hearted, but her sweetheart is gallant youth." Alonzo Cushing and his fellow soldiers who gave their lives at Gettysburg certainly did not die in vain. They died for a cause. They died for a country. And when you think about it, they died for each and every one of us. But those men are us, and we are there, Americans all, and we must remain ever faithful to their cause and their noble ideals. And let us also be ever faithful to their memory. God bless the memories and the families of our fallen and our missing. God bless the United States and this glorious army that, as on that day in 1863, keeps us free. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army.
Well, Mr. Secretary, we will put out the word that 227 words is now the new standard, and may we all endeavor to pursue it. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us as we share this distinct honor of recognizing an American hero. I think Abraham Lincoln's famous words when dedicating the cemetery at Gettysburg are equally appropriate to what we do today. And I quote, "But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground," end of quote. As Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing enters the Hall of Heroes, this ground truly is hallowed by his actions on that terrible yet victorious day on July the 3rd of 1863. So my comments will focus on Lieutenant Cushing the soldier and the timeless inspiration he provides to all warriors in our great military. Alonzo Cushing stood at the center of the line during the battle that was the turning point of the United States Civil War, in the war that was the crucial moment in our country's history as it fought to save the last best hope of earth, a nation committed to the ideals that all men are created equal. Lieutenant Cushing's leadership and valor were heroic that day. The courage and valor of his actions truly helped save the Union. In the summer of 1863, Robert E. Lee invaded the North in an effort to bring war to its people, to defeat the United States Army on its own territory, and to break the already fading will of the Union. He attacked the left flank on July the 1st, the right flank on July the 2nd, but was unable to break the United States Army. He was convinced that Union commanders had weakened their center on Cemetery Ridge to reinforce their flanks, and that a determined attack would cut the Army in half, cause panic in its ranks, and that Union defense would collapse. But on this day, Lee underestimated the strength of the United States Army, valiantly exemplified by Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing. The horror of the fighting at the Battle of Gettysburg is difficult to adequately describe, and essential to understand as we attempt to fully appreciate the magnitude of Lieutenant Cushing's gallantry. The artillery barrage started early in the morning, but came in earnest around 3 p.m. when 150 Confederate guns opened up on the Union line. Their main target was the artillery on Cemetery Ridge. A soldier on the ridge described it like this: "The roar of guns was deafening. The air was soon clouded with smoke, and the shriek and startling crack of exploding shells above, around, and in our midst, the driving through the air of fence rails, posts, and limbs of trees, the groans of dying men, the neighing of frantic and wounded horses, created a scene of absolute horror, end of quote. And while other artillery units withdrew from the ridge, Lieutenant Cushing ordered his 2 surviving artillery pieces directly up against the wall at the bloody angle. Every round that Lieutenant Cushing's guns fired counted. Equally important was his leadership, his refusal to quit, rallying the troops around him. A Union prisoner watched the battle from behind Confederate lines, described just how close Pickett's charge came to success. And I quote, "The Confederates broke over the low, irregular stone wall with a chorus of yells, and our men appeared to be giving way before the onset of the second line. The cheers of the Confederates made the hills echo. In that awful moment, I feared our line was hopelessly broken," end of quote. After Lieutenant Cushing was killed and the Confederates breached the Union line, his men fought like a team possessed, hand to hand, with bayonets, rifle butts, stones, and fists, to hold their ground. When the battle was over, the survivors of Lieutenant Cushing's battery counted 600 dead Confederate soldiers in front of his 2 cannon. The rebels had breached the line, but did not have enough men to hold their stolen ground and exploit their success. Every round counted, and Lieutenant Cushing's valor and the unvanquishable fervor it inspired in his soldiers truly saved the Union. We pay tribute to Alonzo Cushing for his inspiring valor, and in doing so, we honor his family. Present today are family members from 13 United States, North, South, East, and West, which is a tribute to the unity across our diverse nation that Alonzo Cushing fought and died for. But perhaps more importantly, we pay homage and honor to Lieutenant Cushing's soldiers, who, like American soldiers for the past 239 years, have valiantly defended our Union against incalculable odds, defending one another, their brethren in arms, like Colonel John Cushing, who is today deployed in Afghanistan, and all of our soldiers who many times over defend our cause and save the Union. Alonzo Cushing's distant cousin, Matthew John Cushing, is a cadet at West Point, preparing to lead in an army at war. Let this Medal of Honor be a source of strength to Colonel and Cadet Cushing and to all our service members who will preserve this Union and be a light of freedom to the world, today, tomorrow, and forward for 1,000 tomorrows. Thank you, God bless you, and Army Strong.
Gentlemen, Ms. Jessica Loring will make remarks on behalf of the Cushing family.
Good afternoon. It is such an honor to be here today. This is a memory of Alonzo Cushing has lived long in our family, our generations of our Loring branch and the other branches of the Cushing family, our cousins who we have met just recently. We now have a huge extended family. It's wonderful. We've had a wonderful time celebrating. We have remembered Alonzo's record, his heroism. We have some letters from him, and we have told his story, and our families and 3 generations have been named after Alonzo Cushing. I am Jessica Loring. I'm the niece of Helen Loring, and one of the many cousins of Alonzo Cushing who are here today. Alonzo has a huge and wonderful family of descendants, many of whom we'd not met before and met each other until this historic event. All of the Alonzo Cushing descendants gathered here today wish to offer our heartfelt thank you to the Army and President Obama and all of you who have made this event possible. Margaret Zerwig, you are the one who started it all. We are so appreciative to you. These wonderful days we've had to celebrate the heroism and the memory of Alonzo Cushing, and this is a wonderful culmination of it. Thank you. There have been very eloquent words said about Alonzo today. I cannot even begin to match the eloquence, but I would like to say what Alonzo has meant to the Cushing family. And his story has resonated in so many of the Cushings today, and it's a story that resonates in so many more of us and in all Americans. It's a story of loyalty, of courage, and sacrifice, and service above self. All of those are standards which I think we all would hope we could live up to if ever called to do so. It would take a great deal of courage to actually step forward on that artillery or whatever battle we are on or thing that faces us to actually do what Alonzo did and to live up to those standards. His sacrifice and bravery contributed to the rebirth of this great nation. Truly it became, finally, once and for all, a nation indivisible under God. Now, we've had great detailed accounts of what Alonzo did on Cemetery Ridge. I just want to slowly, because I've written them out before, keep with my program that I had made. He stood directly in the face of Pickett's charge at basically ground zero of the attack. He was gravely wounded. He was told to retire and get medical help because he clearly was in terrible shape, and he refused. Instead, he's asked for his 2 remaining cannons to be moved up to the stone wall right in the face of Pickett's charge at the bloody angle. And he and his cannons kept his cannons firing until he was shot and killed. Alonzo's valor and the valor of the many Union soldiers who fought with him in the field that day won the battle. The victory at Gettysburg sounded the beginning of the end of Lee's army and the Confederacy. Alonzo's bravery was well recognized at the time. He was buried at West Point, which was a very high military honor. Further poetry was written in his honor, and I'd like to close today by reading 2 stanzas out of a poem written by Mary A. Dennison, which capture Alonzo well, I believe. It's called The Last Man at the Last Gun. All around the hero lying, war strewed the fated field, with the wounded and the dying, but still he would not yield. On swept the veteran legions, mad with a desperate thought, that by one bleeding stripling their ruin should be wrought. O God's strong arm upheld him, though at his dear life's cost, but for his stern devotion the battle had been lost. At the last gun undaunted, the last man on the field, he nobly fronted peril where even the brave might yield. Thank you, Alonzo Hereford Cushing, for your incredible sacrifice to make this nation the great nation it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Loring. Ladies and gentlemen, the plaque will now be returned to its rightful place in the Hall of Heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and join in the singing of the Army Song. The words to the Army Song can be found in your program.
March along, sing our song with the army of the free. Count the brave, count the true, who have fought to victory. We're the army and proud of our name. We're the army and proudly proclaim. First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might, and the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won, and the army goes rolling along. Then it's hi, hi, hey, the army's on its way. Count off the cadence loud and strong. For where'er we go, you will always know that the army goes rolling along.